The farm, Trefranck, has been in the family since 1703. The farm is situated on the outskirts of Bodmin. We keep about 400 breeding ewes and about 20 cows. On the farm there is the old barn. The barn would have been a very important building. It was the hub of the farm. I remember my father drying corn in this building. I remember it quite well. The dryer would be going day and night, and the condensation that used to come off the grain as it was being dried, and the smells is things that don't leave you. It was quite a busy centre at that time.
I grew up at Trefranck. I used to help out quite a lot on the farm. Apparently I could name every cow in the old shippon, which was part of the barn, when I was 18 months old. As a child, the barn was actually the hub of the farming that went on at Trefranck, because it was either used for the milking or used for the cows or the chicken. When you think about it, most of the income actually came from what was going on in the barn. When I was a child, and I can't remember what age, Dad did actually milk cows for a time and sell milk. It must have been by hand, because I'm sure there were no pipelines or anything. And I also remember the barn being used to keep quite a lot of chicken in. And I can always remember going in the silos when the corn got low, and I'd have to scoop the corn up to go up the auger. I do remember one particular incident when my dad was up on the top level and I was down in the yard outside. He was trying to lift something out of the hatch, and he slipped and fell on some churns which were underneath. He actually had broken some ribs, and I can remember him having to stay in bed a few days.
My name's Sheila Kempthorne, and I married Jimmy Kempthorne on the 25th of April 1981. Moved down to the farm, and we moved into the farmhouse, and the barn was like bang in the middle of the farm, really. There was always cows going into the barn for milking mornings and evenings. We used to share the milking, so there was loads of time spent in the barn. And back then all the cows had names. We used to call the names of something that was current to that year happening. So I know one time we had a lot of cows that were related to athletes because it was the year of the Olympics, and we had one called Flojo. I remember Flojo and different ones, and they all used to know their names. So you'd stand outside and you'd call the cow, and they'd come through the other cows and go in with their calves and that. But now everything's gone technical with tags and numbers. All the cows have lost their names. Looking around the area, it seems to be kind of like the village or a hamlet would have a master barn where everybody used to do the harvest and take their corn and that. This one's an L-shaped one. Jimmy and myself, we put a lambing shed onto the barn, and we do the night shift. So the girls, Gemma or Pippa, one of them would come up with me at like 12 o'clock and we'd go up and see the sheep. And we were up there one night and we heard this noise and we couldn't work out what it was. It sounded like it was coming down the road. So we ran into the barn, turned the light off, and we were peering out through the door of the barn, and it was the army on a route march. And they marched down through our yard. It was the boots that we could hear marching down the road. I was quite interested in the barn and finding out a bit more about the barn, and it always used to intrigue me that there's quite a large hole at the bottom of the barn. And I'd done a little bit of research and found out that there actually used to be a water wheel on the side of the barn, and that was fed by a leat that used to be coming in from the top of the barn through the fields. For some reason that supply seemed to dry up, and there was another pond made in the middle of the farm, and there was a wheel pit house put in that field that used to run on 2 foot by 1 foot granites, and they were every 12 foot from the wheel pit house up to the barn, and run a pulley system to run the mill up in the barn. So there was a water wheel down below, and then that used to run a pulley system to run the mill up in the barn. It would have been nice to have kept the whole system going, but we didn't actually realise it when we got married, and about one of the first things we done was to knock down the wheel pit house. We found a granite cross in the garden, buried in the edge, when we moved the oil tank. And even Nan, who was born here and lived all her life here, never knew there was a granite cross here. Andrew Longdon came out and he found out quite a lot of history about the farm and the surrounding area. I think it goes back to 1276. And the barn was one of the oldest buildings on the farm. And it used to refer to Trefranck as a hamlet. So I think there were quite a few little dwellings around the farm. And Nan always used to say there were 13 dwellings on Trefranck. I think it was a proper little community.
It was always nice at the barn because it's a nice stone building and it always felt quite warm and always the smell of corn. I remember Grampy always milking the cows in it, and I can remember him teaching me how to milk a cow, sat on an upturned bucket, and how you should put your head against the cow's side so the cow thinks it's a calf. The barn's such a beautiful building. So much attention and care went into it, and it was becoming increasingly redundant because of the nature of farming and machinery and things moving on. It wasn't really practical. So I started to get ideas about how we could use it, and I started to clear the space initially so I could use it as a rehearsal space because I'm a dancer and I just wanted a space, and it's there. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to clean that out, and started using it as a space for rehearsing in, and also running painting in and just doing arty type things. And I thought I'd like to do more of this. I don't really know when I got into dance. I just think I always loved dancing. I really enjoy art and I love being physical. I love sport and PE, and so dance is a natural merger of the two, really. Generally, I really enjoy site-specific work, which means dance which is choreographed or made specifically for a setting, and quite often that's an outdoor setting. And I think probably growing up on the farm has had a large part to play in that. We, as a family, wanted to do something with it for quite a few years now, but it's just what. And I suppose I've just come along at the right time, and with the support of my family I'm able to do that. So I feel very privileged and fortunate. I just want it to stay in the family and to go on to the next generation to be used. The position of the barn, for me, is quite important. I don't want to hide the fact it's on a farm. Quite the opposite, in fact. I want to celebrate the fact that it is and try to bring people to the barn and show them more about farming and local history and just rural life, I suppose. That's really important to me. I think that's what I loved about growing up on the farm, is that there is no limits. There's huge scope for creativity. Farms were such a community hub, and the barn especially would have been a real central point, and I want to celebrate that and also rejuvenate it and see that happening, but in a different sense now.
I think the barn renovation is good because it'll mean that the barn's preserved, and it's just another era in time. You know, who knows what'll happen in the future. If things like this weren't done, because the barns are out of date for the purpose they were used for when I was a child, they wouldn't be preserved. You know, they could quite possibly fall down if they weren't used for something else. It's a beautiful barn.
It's good because the barn, probably one of the oldest buildings on the farm, will be brought back into regular use and an asset to the family and the community.